Today, I bring you an interview that few media outlets would care to devote time to, one that pivots the narrative on the death of Manny Ellis in March of 2020. In December 2023, a Pierce County jury acquitted former Tacoma officer Timothy Rankine of manslaughter in the death of Manny Ellis, a verdict that flew in the face of a politically charged climate and a national outcry that demanded police accountability, even when there wasn't really anything to be accountable to. And instead of being treated as a law enforcement officer who deserved the benefit of the doubt, Rankine became the target of prosecutorial overreach, defamation, a rush to judgment that was fueled by the Black Lives Matter movement. Now, to many of you, this case is emblematic. This is a police officer who was thrown into the mess of public opinion, political theater, and then ultimately acquitted, yet obviously left with scars that a jury is not going to be able to repair. Joining me to discuss is former Tacoma PD officer Timothy Rankine. Welcome to the studio.
Thanks for having me.
So why now? Why do you want to tell your story?
Yeah, I think right now is kind of the best time to do it. It's like no one has had our story since even, the criminal trial. But now that everything has kind of concluded with all the investigations ending from, the federal investigation to the 4 other investigations that were done by internal affairs and Pierce County, State Patrol, the AGs, I think now it's like the perfect time to kind of come out and talk about our story and what happened to us. And
I imagine the perfect time was probably for you years ago, wasn't it? I mean, you probably wanted to speak this entire time.
Yeah. I mean, as you know, I've tried really hard to try to get our story out there because no one's heard our side. They've always heard the side from the AGs or what the media has spun, and the media has always been against us. Even still to this day, it has always been against us. But unfortunately, with the federal investigation and all the other investigations, we couldn't really speak because anything we would say, publicly could easily be used against us.
Yeah.
So, from the advice of counsel, we chose not to talk about it.
When did you realize that you had become this sort of political battleground, that this entire case was more seemingly about politics than it was about anything else?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a story in itself, but I was a Tacoma officer. I was working overtime doing all the BLM riots and protests that was happening in Tacoma. I think the time I realized that something was going to happen with this case and it was going to be bigger than what I expected out of it, was just working at BLM protests like midday, I think it was in the afternoon time frame, and driving along and seeing all the signs on the street. And, there it was, my name, Timothy Rankine, murderer, on a big billboard held on the side of the street. And I was just like, well, things are about to change quite significantly. So, did
you expect that it was going to get the national attention that it did?
No, definitely not. I think when, the story I always tell is we were told that same day I saw the sign, my sergeant had approached me and told us that they're releasing the names of the officers involved in that case. And one of my questions I asked him was, is there any worries or concern? And he simply said, no, it's just standard protocol. That's what we always have done. So that's what we're going to do. And I said, okay. And then you see the sign and you're like, well, things is about to change.
Yeah.
And I think everyone realized, especially the department realized that things, especially that same night when the mayor came out and publicly, said what she said, throwing us under the bus and calling us murderers. Yeah, that was the big turning point where I think nationally everyone picked it up.
So take us through what happened from your vantage point that night.
Yeah, so I and my partner, Masai Ford, were the first backup officers to arrive. So the call in itself is, it's a hard call to go to. It's 2 very experienced officers, really well known in the department as the go-to officers in the department, and they always have had this kind of this persona where they never call for help because they're good at their job. So for them to come over the radio or try to broadcast over the radio and then nothing come off of it, and then dispatch trying to get in touch with them, no one has ever heard from those two officers in that scenario. So when it was finally broadcast and it was just an address in a really panicked voice, I think everyone showed up to the scene. And, I think still to this day, very few people knew that like there was 20 plus officers. I want to say close to 25 officers from 4 different agencies that showed up to the scene to help those 2 officers. Cause that's the type of incident it was. It was an officer in need, unknown trouble. When I first pulled up to the scene, I didn't know what I was getting myself into. I didn't know if I was going to find 2 officers that were dead. I didn't know if I was going to find 2 officers that were fighting with someone. You have no idea because there was no information put out. And then the type of caliber of those 2 officers, like what kind of situation are they into or are involved in that they can't even broadcast on the radio? That's where I think it was just this level of panic where everyone was like, oh, we got to go.
So when you got there, what did you see?
So when I first got there, I actually couldn't see the officers till I got out of my car and started running towards the intersection because I pulled up right behind their vehicle. And what I saw was, 2 of the officers fighting with an individual on the ground. And the way the fight was I don't think I've ever seen something like that. It was just the level of the struggle was so intense that I, at the time, did not even know this guy was handcuffed because it did not appear at all that this guy was handcuffed at all. But once we got there, it was me and my partner. We ran up. We helped secure the legs, and then we helped secure the upper body. And then 40 seconds since I got there, a lot of backup came. So within probably a minute of me being there, there was probably an additional 10 officers that were there. So.
Now, if I recall correctly, you had testified during the trial that you were holding him down or pressing him down while he said something to the extent of not being able to breathe. Could you put some context to that?
Yeah. So the level of struggle and the level of fight this guy had was definitely something I've never experienced. We talk about excited delirium and people having like superhuman strength. That was my first experience of like actually seeing like superhuman strength. And the way I always describe it is you have 2 officers holding his legs. You have 2 officers holding his upper body. And this guy from a prone position could raise his whole upper body like he's doing like almost like a ab workout and just lift off the ground. And I was like, what kind of power do you have to be able to lift 4 officers off the ground? And that's kind of how I described it in my statement. And that's how I've always described it. It's like he was struggling with us so much that it's just like the level of like resistance he was putting up was just like, it was unfathomable. Like it was almost it was superhuman.
But at the moment when that was happening with Manny Ellis, I mean, what went through your head as to try to explain to yourself like how he was reacting in such a powerful way? Did you think it was drug related?
Yeah. So because I was such a young officer, I didn't know what to think. I was just like, man, this dude is just way strong. And if he's strong enough to move all 4 of us into the roadway, is he strong enough to break out of his handcuffs that he's in? I was like, I checked the handcuffs when I was, transitioning up to his upper body, but I was like, what if he broke out of the handcuff? What do we do now? And then, going back to what you were saying about the I can't breathe portion of it, like that was the very first time I ever heard this guy talk. Was he said, I can't breathe. And I was just like, whoa. And it's like, because it came over as a very calm, normal, monotone voice, like, I can't breathe, sir. And I said, that's the biggest thing with the media is like, my response to him was, if you can talk to me, you can breathe. If you stop struggling with me, I'll let off some pressure. But in that same, it's one sentence, but the way the media, the AGs portrayed it, they always cut half of it off because it doesn't fit the narrative. The narrative is, he said, I can't breathe. And I just answered him, and I didn't try to let off any pressure off of him. But in fact, at that night, in that same incident, after I said that to him, he stopped struggling. I let off some pressure, and I kept pressure off him till he started struggling again.
What was your partner doing?
He was right beside me the whole entire time. So he was on one of his legs, on one of Manny Ellis's legs. But he was there watching everything I was doing. So
he was not charged.
He was not.
Why do you think that is?
I have my theories, but
I think I know one of your theories, so I'll ask you what you think your theory is.
Well, I think with the narrative of portraying us from the city mayor and the AGs trying to portray us as racist murderer cops, it's hard to go after a black officer and say that he's a racist murderer cop when, you know, he's the race in question.
When you heard the whole idea of racism, obviously the intent, I think, was to portray all the officers as white. You're not white.
I'm not.
So how did you process that?
I think it goes back to, I think a lot of people think that maybe the Asian race is not really a minority in itself.
Mm-hmm.
But I think kind of the running joke between me and my lawyers is that I have a very white sounding name. Timothy Rankine is a very white name. And the AGs probably looked at it across the board like, oh, white name. Let's go.
Didn't even realize.
Yeah, I didn't even realize it. And they finally saw my picture and they're like, oh, snap. He's Asian.
Yeah, oops, we screwed that up. What's your relationship like with your former partner? And what was it like at the time that this was all going down?
So at the time, we were very close. I would consider Masai Ford as family. We hung out pretty much every single weekend. We talked all the time. I mean, we were together in the same car, 4 days out of the week. I knew his family. I knew his dogs. His dogs always hung out and played with my dogs. He knew my family. But the trial, because of the trial and because he was in charge, we weren't allowed to speak. So the AGs alienated us from everyone from Tacoma. So we weren't allowed to talk to, the only person we could talk to was Henry Batts. That was the union president for Tacoma, who
still is
great. Great guy. Super supportive, really helped us through a lot of this. But he was the only one we could talk to. No one else, anyone that was involved, because the whole entire south end of where we work, so the 3 and 4 sector, I worked in the 3, the other 2 officers that are involved were in the 4 sector. We basically are called the south end. It's the rougher part of Tacoma. We always help each other out on our calls. We always go from call to call together. All of them showed up to the scene, so we couldn't talk to anyone. So the friends and squad mates that I had, we couldn't talk to. And so with Ford, I couldn't talk to him for, I think the first time I talked to him after we got charged was during the trial. And that's after he testified, then I was able to talk to him. But yeah, I think now I wish the relationship was better. I know he still works for Tacoma and he has his own troubles with that. But I don't know, that lost time and the distance and barriers that it put up between us is just, I don't know if you can get back that relationship. And yeah, I miss him every day and I wish we could go back to where we were, but it's, that's, kind of what you're talking about was the scars that were left behind. Is I'm a glaring reminder of when things go wrong for him. He wasn't charged, during, he wasn't charged in this case, but he had, death threats, people showing up to his house just the same way. And he lived in Tacoma. So for people to go protest his house was very easy compared to going to our houses that were outside of Tacoma. So he had to face quite a bit of adversity because of this, even though he was in charge. So for me, I guess long story short is short answer is our relationship's not anywhere close to what it used to be.
What is the message you think to officers who act in good faith, get charged, and then are acquitted, and yet still lose their jobs, lose their livelihoods, and essentially I think language you've used is basically be blacklisted from becoming law enforcement again?
I don't know. I mean, I don't really know if there's any advice to be given. The one common theme that a lot of everyone that knows about the case, which majority of law enforcement in Washington State knows about the case, the one common theme that everyone always says is it literally could have been anyone. It could have been any of the 20-some officers that showed up, but it just happened to be all three of us. So it's like the advice to give them, it's like, I don't know, try to do your job as best you can. Hope that you have good leadership that will stand behind you. I think that's the one thing with Tacoma when all this went down. We had really good leadership from Henry Batts, the union president, to, Chief Don Ramsdale when we had him, and our assistant chiefs. They were super supportive of us. And I think without the support of Tacoma, we would have been in worse shape. But they all got replaced because of this, because they stood beside us. Mm-hmm. So I think my overall advice is try to do the job the best of your ability. Take pride in your job, but also know that there's always eyes watching over you. So be cautious about what you're doing.
In any other world, that'd be normal. It's not like police officers, yourself included, are saying we are above oversight, that people shouldn't be looking at what it is we do. The work you do is incredibly important, and it also takes a lot of trust from a community to not, implode into what it did. I mean, obviously, it's impossible to go back and not think of this. Had what happened with George Floyd not occurred, your case, I imagine, would not have had even remotely the same level of interest, not just from the public, but from the media.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
How did you feel about the media coverage?
Terrible. Absolutely terrible. Still to today, it's terrible. If you Google the thousands of articles there is out there about us, there's not one article that's positive or in our favor or anything of that sort. It's like, even just using like the acquittal from the trial, media spun it in so many ways that like, oh, those cops got off and so on and so forth. And still to this day, it's just media from the Seattle Times, KX, all the guys that spent all the time in the trial making up phony stories about us, just trying to paint us in the worst light possible. Media's just always been against us. But that's the cool thing to do, right? Be against cops. That's how you sell clicks and sell advertising and sell newspaper, is be against cops, because that's the cool thing to do. So it's more of a, I don't know, like a propaganda lifestyle kind of thing. Be against cops. All cops are bad.
I can't imagine how you still feel, other than I imagine it's still incredibly raw talking about that, right? I mean, despite being acquitted, you are a murderer to a bunch of activists and to many in the media, and you get portrayed that way.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, it's, my wife would know. I've been trying to go back to law enforcement in the state and out of state. I was waiting kind of on a final offer from a law enforcement agency that was kind of by us. And just last week, I found out that they decided they're not going to go forward with me because of my past, even though from the get-go, they knew all about my past. And, the department itself was very supportive of it. But it's just, that's the craziness about this whole thing is no matter what I do, no matter what I say, and that's kind of a reason why I'm trying to get a story out there, is just we're always still painted as murderer, racist cops when that is so far from the truth. And, still to this day, I don't know what I can do or say to clear my name. And it's just like, I don't know how many more investigations we have to go through to clear our name.
What if the answer to that is there is nothing you can do, that it will not change the trajectory that you were on as an up-and-coming law enforcement officer? I think you were only on the job a year and a half-ish.
Yeah.
Give or take.
Yeah, about 2 years.
So about that amount of time. And, the reality is, especially in Washington State, at least in Western Washington, my guess is, your story is obviously not unique. Thurston County comes to mind, and the sheriff's office there and an attempt to make a hire. We certainly know of lots of officers who, because of termination, they've been left sort of in this limbo with the Washington State Training Commission and trying to figure out, well, what can I do now? What if the answer is there's nothing you can do? You're never going to be a law enforcement officer in Washington again. Has that come across your mind?
It has numerous times. And I mean, my wife can back me on this. I apply to a bunch of agencies and I'll take, a certain amount of no's before I'm like, okay, maybe it's not for me.
Mm-hmm.
But I think ultimately the biggest thing is I try to live a pretty godly Christian life. And if it's in God's plan that I'm supposed to go back to law enforcement or wherever, his path is, I think that's kind of where I'm at. Because, what you're saying is exactly right. There's nothing I can say or do that can change my name or change any of the articles that's out there.
Well, and I imagine it's equally frustrating or more frustrating because you're talking with people in law enforcement who understand what it is you're going through and understand the unfair nature of all of this.
Oh, yeah, definitely. But I think this is, as we know, the crime rate in Washington State is through the roof.
I'm told there's no crime happening all the time, that I make this stuff up.
I don't know. I just saw a poll that says Washington State is the third worst crime rate, but maybe that poll was wrong. But I think the problem with being just policing in Washington is weak leadership. No one wants leadership is just it becomes so political. And I don't understand why policing is a political thing. Policing and politics don't go hand in hand. When a police officer arrests someone for a crime, it's white or black. It's like, it's a letter of the law, basically. It's, did you commit the crime and do you commit the elements of the crime? And if you did, I'm arresting you for it. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Sure, there is officer discretion and stuff, but why is politics into it? It's not like when I arrest someone, I'm not saying, oh, are you a Republican or are you a Democrat? And then it's going to sway the way I'm going to arrest you. But nowadays it feels a lot like that. It's a lot of departments, like if you want funding, you got to follow the norm of hating cops, even though you're a department that is supposed to support your fellow officers and you don't.
Well, if it helps, I don't think you'd be able to make any arrests at this point anyway. So
that is very true.
In that position. Did anyone during all of this ever apologize to you?
Nope. Still to this day, no one's ever said sorry to us. Even, our most recent meeting with the city of Tacoma, one of the first things they said to us is, well, the mayor didn't cause this. And we're like, yes, she did.
She contributed.
She said what she said on live TV during her public announcement. And then days later, all these articles come off of it. And it's all a bunch of bad articles. So how are you going to say that's not her that contributed to the start of us being crucified, basically, and publicly, shamed? So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the answer is to that.
A bit of an unfair question. Obviously, you now know what happened in the aftermath of your actions and other officers and Manny Ellis's actions. Have you looked back and said, maybe this should not have occurred?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And my answer is, yeah, I have a very photographic memory. Being from the military and stuff, I always conduct my own like debrief, think back on my actions, think back on anything I've ever done from the military to contract work to being a cop. Always think about ways you can improve and do better, because that's ultimately what the public wants from us, right? To do better, do our job as best of our ability. And so with this case in particular, this incident, you know, I think back like on it so much. But the bottom line is my conscience is pretty clear about it, that there's nothing I could have done in my power to have changed the trajectory of how the incident played out. You know, like everyone keeps asking us, you know, I don't think any of us, when we got replaced by fire, after I did CPR on him for like 10 plus minutes, when we got replaced by fire, I went about my way, still at the scene, but I was back in my cop car, like researching and trying to type up a report for this incident. I didn't think he was going to die, you know, like no signs of it pointed to him dying. But yeah, and that's the part where the media kind of spins it. It's like not a lot of people know that me and an officer did CPR on him for 10 plus minutes before the rest of fire could get there. So, you know, I don't know. Yeah. I think ultimately I did the best of my ability. I did everything I could in my power to save that guy's life. And it's sad and it's very unfortunate that he died. But I had no ill intent. I did not want him to die. And, you know, like, I think I've mentioned it to other people, was like, I really do think Manny Ellis was a good guy. It's just drugs was his downfall. And when he did drugs, he just became this whole different person. And it's just unfortunate that the incident played out the way it did.
It is. And, you know, I've talked to many officers who are involved with suspects who end up dying, and they obviously don't go into the office hoping to ever even use their firearm, and they always feel haunted by the aftermath, regardless of whether or not everything was done to the T. And that's just the reality. Final question for you. Why do you still want to be a cop?
Yeah, I have, maybe it's a downside of me, but I have a very big heart and I care about a lot of people. I think I've always had this yearning to serve other people and help other people. So I think for me, that's where I'm like, you know, I go back to looking at it and then I think back on the trial and stuff. And I'm like, man, do I really want to be a cop and put myself through all of this? But yeah, I don't know. So much of me still wants to be a cop, but I don't know. But yeah, I think ultimately it comes down to whether it's in God's will that I become a cop.
Well, thank you for sharing your story. As I think I said at the beginning, I can't imagine this is easy for you, and I imagine it's bringing up a whole lot of emotions that you otherwise probably are still struggling a little bit to control and not have it consume you. So I hope that this makes a difference. I certainly hope that people don't just hear this story, but share the story, because you're right. You've been defined by the Seattle Times and King 5 News, which I would never want anyone to be defined by anything that comes out of either of those outlets and many others in this region. So Timothy Rankine, thank you so much for stopping by. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You're listening to The Jason Rantz Show on Seattle Red, 770 AM.
Download the smartphone app to take Seattle Red with you everywhere you go. With Seattle Red in your pocket, you can read up on the latest news and opinion and stream your favorite shows 24/7. Download now to stay connected with Seattle Red anytime, anywhere.